Welcome to the video guys, I'm Rooster and this is my review and first impressions of the Steam Deck. So I got my Steam Deck through the door just over a week ago and me and my partner T have been playing around with it ever since, so I thought I'd put together a review of my first impressions and experience using the Steam Deck. Personally, I found that far too many reviews out there are just too techy. Yeah, it's nice to know exactly what the clock speed of the Steam Deck is or how good its thermal design is, but realistically, how useful is that to the standard everyday user? What is more important is how does it feel to play the Steam Deck? So that's what I intend to do, tell you how it really feels to use the Steam Deck. I will be covering FPS in games here and there, but they certainly will not be the main focus of the video. So if you're looking for a really in-depth tech review, then sorry, this video really isn't for you. But if you just want to know if it's enjoyable to use, then sit back and let me tell you how I feel. So a big part of any physical device is the build quality. How does it feel in the hands? Do you feel like you're gonna break it? Is it nice and comfortable? So that's where I thought I'd start with. The Steam Deck feels really nice to the touch. Made of hard but fairly premium feeling plastic. The slight texture to the plastic also gives it a nice feel, similar if not a little bit more subtle than the Xbox Series X controllers, and less like the glossy feel of the PlayStation 5 controller. This I think is very much personal preference, but I am a massive fan of that slightly more textured feel. The buttons in general feel really nice to press, with about the amount of click to them as I would expect from any other controller. However, I do feel the Steam and the 3-dot options buttons positioned just under the trackpads feel a lot more squishy than the ABXY buttons, for example. There is a little bit of a click, but there's also basically no travel time to them, so they just feel somewhat odd and just squishy feeling. The analog sticks I actually really like. They feel nice in the thumbs, and I don't know if this is like a sort of placebo effect, because they seem a little smaller than the Xbox or PlayStation controller sticks, but they also feel like they have a little more resistance to them. Not in a bad way, I actually quite like the fact they feel slightly stiffer. But what about one of the more unique aspects of the controller? The trackpads are a little hit and miss for me from first impressions. Yes, they are nice and very useful when used for mouse control and are pretty much required for desktop mode, if you're not using peripherals of course. But I really don't like the swipe. Basically, you can swipe the trackpad and the mouse cursor will keep moving a little after you stop touching the trackpad, and that just doesn't feel right to me. I also seem to bump the corners of them with my palm ever so slightly, and this will activate them, so that can get really annoying at times. I don't have small hands, but I also don't really have massive hands either, so I feel like this could potentially be a problem that a lot of people will have. On the other hand though, I did find myself switching back and forth between the sticks and the trackpad when playing Portal, depending on what I was doing, so maybe I just need to adjust and I'll sort of get used to them over time. The back buttons are a really nice addition, I feel, and honestly, they don't get in the way. My fingers seem to naturally rest on them, ready for use when I hold the controller, without the need for any adjustment, and yet I also don't find myself accidentally clicking them, which did surprise me. Maybe if you really squeeze the controller a lot in tense moments, then you might find that you do click them, but in that case you probably could just deactivate the buttons for specific games like that. My only issue with them is honestly more my own fault. I just don't use them. Not yet anyways. Half the time I just seem to forget they're even there. I've never used anything like the Xbox Elite controller, so I'm really not used to having these back buttons as an option, so I simply forget about them. This is just one of many instances with the Steam Deck where it's just something that I'll need to take some time to get used to and adjust. Now, how about the weight of the Steam Deck? This one does seem to come up quite a lot. Everyone seems to be talking about and worrying about the Steam Deck's weight being considerably heavier than the Switch, coming in at 669 grams compared to the Switch's 420 grams. Now on paper that sounds absolutely massive, but honestly, when I first picked up this device, I was shocked. I was really expecting it to feel a lot heavier than it does. Yes, the Steam Deck is heavier, but it certainly isn't heavy. Maybe it's just because I went in expecting it to be heavier than it was, but I honestly don't feel like the weight will cause much of a problem for most people at all. Yeah, maybe if you have been sat there holding it up for a few hours playing something, then your wrists might feel the strain a little, and you'll want to start resting it on a pillow or something. But if that's the case, then you would probably have run into the same issue using the Nintendo Switch. That extra weight really isn't going to make a huge difference, and the ergonomics of the device really help to outweigh the extra weight, pun intended. One little thing that I noticed, and hey, this might just be me being stupid. Okay, this is definitely me just being stupid, but I find I keep pressing the B button instead of the A button to select things. I think my brain just keeps associating the handheld feel with the Switch, and I keep defaulting to the Nintendo button layout. Just something that'll take some time to get used to, but I thought it was funny and worth mentioning that I keep going back instead of selecting something. Interestingly though, I only seem to do this in the menus and haven't been making this same mistake while actively playing games. I think my brain might just be missing a few brain cells is all. Initial impressions of the UI are really good. It's fluid and intuitive. Really easy and simple to get around. Everything just seems to work just about how you'd expect it to, with the D-pad and left stick to navigate around, using the bumpers to cycle through pages and categories. The UI isn't without its issues though. There have been a few small bugs along the way, nothing major, just little hiccups here and there. The sort of things that would be fairly easy to patch in, and none that really hindered my ability to use the Steam Deck, so nothing too worrying. Using multiple accounts on the Steam Deck is an absolute breeze. Just sign in to your first account, then go to the profile at the top right, scroll down, and switch account. You'll now get the option to add another account. Once you have more than one account signed in, you will be prompted with the option to choose which account you want to sign in as when you power on the deck. Now once an account is signed in, if you've selected to remember it, then you will not be prompted for a password again, so make sure you're only sharing a deck with people you trust. Like within your own household, for example. Me and my partner T are sharing our Steam Deck, and so the ability to just choose which one of us is using it is really good, but of course we also completely trust each other with each other's accounts. The multiple accounts also works flawlessly with the library sharing feature, so I can borrow my partner's casual games that I would probably not want to buy, and she can borrow my less than casual library of games she may not wish to buy but would want to try. It all just works so smoothly. Setting this up, if you don't already have it set, is really simple too. Once a game is installed by another user, if you do not own it, you'll be given the option to borrow the game, at which point you're asked if you want to request access to the other user's library. If the other user accepts your request, which they'll receive via email, then bam, you're now sharing libraries and you can play their games on your account. It's as simple as that. This makes the Steam Deck a perfect family device, and it's a feature I can see getting a lot of use on Steam Decks shared by households. The ease of use of this definitely gets a thumbs up from me. So many of us are going to be more than happy tweaking settings here and there to really squeeze out every last drop of performance and or battery life out of the Steam Deck, but there are plenty of users out there who are looking for something they can just pick up and play. T, for example, isn't going to spend time playing with settings. She simply doesn't care enough, so I thought I would test some games out of the box and see how they run with absolutely no settings changed. Just turn on, install, and play. The first game I tested was Rocket League. I felt this would make for a decent starting point, as the game isn't exactly the most taxing game I can play on the Steam Deck, but it's not quite solitaire either. Well, simply put, I was impressed. Very impressed. The game looks pretty good, if not a little difficult to see the players' names at a distance. They tend to look a little pixelated, but all in all, the game looks great, and I got a solid, consistent 60 FPS. The deck calculated about 3 hours of battery too, while I was on 80%, so that's pretty solid in my books. I do have to say though, the slight difference in controller shape definitely threw me a bit. and I can tell I'm gonna need some practice on the deck before I'm performing like I do on PC. I did find it a little difficult at times, as I tend to twist and tilt the controller in my hands when things get a bit hectic, and with the screen being attached to the controller, that did make it a little bit hard to see at times, but again, that's more my problem than the deck's problem. Now, what about Dragon's Dogma? An old favourite of mine that I haven't played in a long time, but I felt fits perfectly for the Steam Deck. This game is also unverified, so this was a good opportunity to try out a game that hasn't been rigorously tested by Valve, so could run into some issues, but I believed would probably hold up fine. And well, I was right. The game itself was released on console as well, so I selected controller input method and launched the prologue. The game looked, sounded, and felt amazing. Another solid, consistent 60 FPS, even during combat, straight out of the box without any tweaking to settings. And just to reiterate, this is a game that was unverified on Steam. Okay, so what about a more modern game, like Elden Ring? Everyone else seems to be testing Elden Ring on this thing, so of course I had to give it a go too. Well, this is where we step away from the 60 FPS out of the box, but I also didn't mind playing it without any tweaks. The game ran at around 45 FPS, but let's ignore the numbers for a moment and talk about how it felt. Honestly, the gameplay was enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to stop playing it at my PC, as the performance and quality of the game is just so much better for obvious reasons. But if I'm going away or maybe sick in bed, then yes, you can bet I'm going to be playing Elden Ring on the Steam Deck, and I'm going to love every moment of it. So, I've already said that many people will not want to be tweaking settings on the Steam Deck and just want an out-of-the-box experience, but what about those who are happy to tweak settings? Well, the Steam Deck definitely has you covered. At one click of a button, you can find yourself in a settings menu where you can turn on and off varying levels of statistics displays, set frame rate caps, adjust FSR settings, all of this built into the Steam Deck itself and not the games. All of this combined with the adjustments of in-game settings too can really help with getting the right balance for you on smooth, good-looking gameplay and battery life. Maybe you're sat right next to a plug socket, so battery life isn't important right now. Crank up that FPS cap and enjoy the game at 60 FPS and looking good. Maybe you're in the garden on a nice day and don't want to have to get up because you're low on battery. Then drop down that FPS cap, switch up some FSR, and really squeeze out some extra playtime. Especially in games where high frame rates aren't really that important. Honestly, if you're into it, the control is there for you, and that's not to mention the fact that Valve are still working on more things to implement in later updates, so the level of control may even get better down the line. Now, if we're going to talk about settings, then we have to bring up the Steam controller settings. Steam has probably the greatest controller customization I've ever used, and the Steam Deck thrives on it. Honestly, there is just so much you can do. Many games will already have controller configurations designed for them, whether that be a standard Xbox or PlayStation style setup by default, or some custom ones made by the community, which are usually way more in depth and interesting. But if there isn't, or you just feel like having your own setup, you can probably make virtually any game work if you can spend the time to really tweak those controls. Now, as amazing as the Steam Deck is, it's not perfect. It's still a handheld, and it's still Linux, so not everything is going to run perfectly right out the box, and this is where the amazing control we have over the Steam Deck comes in handy. First thing, what about games that I theoretically shouldn't be able to play? Fall Guys is actually one of those games. Although it seems like the perfect sort of game for the Steam Deck, the use of easy anti-cheat has caused some hiccups, so yeah, a few games using easy anti-cheat now work on the Steam Deck, such as Apex Legends, but Mediatonic have been having some issues getting easy anti-cheat working properly. It's not like Bungie with Destiny 2, where they have flat out said anyone on Steam Deck who tries to play Destiny 2 may get banned. Mediatonic are trying to get easy anti-cheat sorted, but no luck yet. This isn't the end though. Even though this game is officially marked as unsupported, there are workarounds. Tweaking a few files and relocating the easy anti-cheat executable will get things working, and even better, there are ready-made scripts available that you can simply run in the console in desktop mode, and there you go, this completely unsupported game now works, and pretty well I might add. I had a great time playing Fall Guys on the Steam Deck. The two just go so well together. But what about some games that may put the Steam Deck through its paces a bit? Well, I decided to test Monster Hunter World for this very reason, and although I tweaked a few settings to really get it feeling how I wanted, I was amazed. The game didn't run at a solid 60, no matter what I tweaked. More like 45 to be honest, but it was still more than playable. I actually ended up limiting the frame rate down to 30 for the sake of battery life, and tweaked some settings in-game like reducing shadow quality, as on a small display like with the Steam Deck compared to a large monitor, it really doesn't make much of a difference when you're looking at the shadows. And this meant I could keep settings that really mattered like the actual resolution and image quality much higher. A little like with Rocket League, it takes some getting used to using the Steam Deck controls, which I think is going to be the case with any game that requires a fast reaction, but I can say I would be happy to play Monster Hunter World on the Steam Deck, and I certainly will. So yeah, there are sacrifices that you may need to make with some games, but honestly, if you're expecting no sacrifices, then a handheld console really isn't for you, and the sacrifices, in my opinion, really aren't that bad. But what kind of battery life can you expect out of the Steam Deck? Well, honestly, that's a really hard question to answer. It's so variable, even Valve gave a multi-hour estimate range, and I can see why. On one hand, I had experiences like with Rocket League and Fall Guys where I could expect several hours, somewhere around the 3 to 4 hours mark, and that was with brightness and speakers turned all the way up at 60 FPS. But then you have something like Monster Hunter, for example. This game puts a lot more strain on the battery, so I could expect more like 1 hour by default, but limiting the FPS and using FSR could push me closer to 2 hours. I'm sure there are plenty more tweaks that could probably cram a little bit more battery life out of there. These were just things that I played around with in the first 20 minutes of playing to see what I could try and get. There are also way less taxing games, like with some emulation. Speaking of which, let me know down in the description if you'd like me to do a review on my experience with emulation on the Steam Deck. And you could probably expect to see upwards of 4 hours, which isn't bad. What I can say at least is that in my experience, the Steam Deck estimated battery life in the options menu is pretty close. So the Steam Deck is not just a handheld console, it's a handheld PC, and so for that reason it has a desktop mode, and this desktop mode is very useful, and I'm very thankful it is included instead of us being locked to the Steam mode. Obviously, most users will spend the majority of their time in Steam mode, but the ability to use the desktop mode is very handy. Now yeah, people are showing off using the Steam Deck as a desktop hooked up to mice, keyboards and monitors, but let's be real here, who is buying a Steam Deck for that? The main function for desktop mode is going to be for setting a few things up, like maybe a little light browsing, setting up emulators like Dolphin and external game launchers such as Origin or Epic, whether that be using a Linux native tool like the Hero Launcher or using Proton to install the Windows versions through the Steam interface. Let me know down in the description if you'd also like me to do a review of my experience with setting up such options. But either way, once you've set these things up, most people will just add them to the Steam as a non-Steam game and then launch them from the Steam interface and not from desktop mode. So, I've covered my experience and impressions on what the Steam Deck has to offer for a standard user all throughout this video, but that's not it. The Steam Deck is still evolving with major updates to the software of the device. Just during the final stages of me writing this review, Valve actually put out a brand new update with some pretty huge additions. The latest update has brought with it a feature that users have been wanting since the Steam Deck first started shipping, and that is a lock screen with pin activation. Users can set how and when they wish the lock and pin screen to activate, whether that be from boot, log in, or even when trying to switch to the desktop mode. This, however, is per device and not per account, so anybody who wants to use the device is going to need to know the PIN to the device itself. The Steam Achievements page has received a bit of a visual upgrade with some functionality enhancements. Steam Keyboard has had 21 new language layouts added, and the ability to switch between multiple windows, either when on a browser or on games with a launcher. These are just some of the key additions that updates are still bringing to the Steam Deck. I've said it in the past, and I'll say it again. The Steam Deck we have today is nothing compared to the Steam Deck we can have in the future. If you would rather wait for more updates like this and get your Steam Deck later in its life when it has improved, then no one can fault you. But for me, I love getting these new updates with new features and improvements along the way. All in all, I love the device as it is now, but I'm excited for what the device can be in the future. Well, those are my first impressions of the Steam Deck, and how I feel it has fared as a standard user. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comments if you would like to see videos covering emulation and third-party launchers, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.